So while you are recording, then let me record our thanks to our guest speaker today, who's Fiona Macalister from the Commerce Law and Management faculty, who has done her postgraduate work and her interest in digital literacy. And she's taking us through a 5-part series, which we've been thoroughly enjoying. And Fiona, we're looking forward to your discussion today. Just for those who are coming specifically for learning more about your thinking on AI, I just wanted to check that will be included in the next session that you're going to be doing.
It will actually be the last session, sure.
Okay.
That's going to focus specifically on AI literacy as such.
That's great.
Taking everything into consideration, but also focusing very much on prompt engineering, which I think is what is the most useful tool, in terms of teaching and learning, is how we make use of prompt engineering, taking the focus off of the sort of plagiarism side of things, so to speak, or the cheating side of stuff, because I think the prompt engineering is the most promising in terms of teaching and learning.
That's lovely. Thanks. So we very much look forward to today, all about digital literacy and digital communication, and the next couple within the series, which we're very much looking forward to. So Fiona, thank you for taking your time and your energy to share with us, and we're looking very forward to what you have to say.
Thanks, sure. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. We're now delving into the area of digital literacy and digital communication, and this is something that will definitely speak more to the academic literacy, although all of these literacies do, but we'll look at that a little bit later on. Okay, I'm going to start again. I'm going to give a very brief recap of where what we're looking at. Digital literacy as such is not, I know some people have already been through this, but I'm doing this for the benefit of people who have attended previously. Digital literacy is not computer literacy. We tend to think of it as just the point and click and using a mouse, using a keyboard, using different types of software, and it most certainly is that. That is the foundation of it. But it is not computer literacy. That in itself is a subset of digital literacy. Also, we have this tendency to think of the first year experience, of the computer labs. We picture the students sitting in there, getting used to the equipment. And as I've said, yes, this is indeed a foundational aspect of digital literacy, but it's not the end of it. Here, we are just giving them some basic skills in terms of using the equipment, using software, but it will expand far more and take on more depth as they move through their degrees, because there are different aspects that come into play in terms of how you're using the technology, the software, whatever it might be, how this integrates, in fact, with what you're teaching the students and how it integrates with a specific subject. So this is very, very important, but it's not the be-all and the end-all. The particular framework we're looking at is the JISC framework, which is the Joint Information Systems Committee in the UK. They do a lot of grant-funded projects. They have up around teaching and technology and all sorts of things. And this initially was a grant-funded project that has now expanded into a whole area of looking at how different types of digital capabilities and so forth, and they've actually drawn up a very good framework. I've used them rather than the ST or ST framework, because it's an American framework. It addresses very much the same sort of things, but more from a perspective of what they would call K-12, the more the schools and the basic education. So JISC really is, for me, is the standard in terms of higher education, because that is their focus, their specific focus in terms of digital literacy. One thing I want to touch on again also is the rather annoying digital native myth that was put forward by Mark Prensky in the early 2000s. I actually, at the time, I admired his enthusiasm. I think he did have a point to a certain degree, but unfortunately, it has now created the idea amongst many academics, particularly, that students just come out of the box, fully equipped with all sorts of digital literacy skills. They most certainly are more digital, if I can put it that way, than maybe some of the older generation. But it's also been my experience that I've known people who are close to retirement or or post-retirement who are far more digitally literate than, for example, your average student who's entering into university or leaving school. So his idea was that students are really, they, as he says here, native speakers of the digital language of computers and video games and internet, simply by virtue of the fact that they are using these on a daily basis. And then, of course, anybody who's older than that and has not been literally born into that sort of thing are digital immigrants. So this is something that I'm afraid has created a bit of a divide, in terms of people realizing the extent to which students, incoming students, particularly school-leaving students, are not that digitally literate, and particularly when it comes to your specific subject field. They're not going to have the levels of literacy. Yes, certainly they spend a lot of time on social media, things like WhatsApp and so forth, and TikTok and all of those things. So but that is a whole, that they're using that for entertainment, for more in like a social, literally, because we're talking about social media here. They're using that more in terms of being social and in their private lives. It most certainly helps, but we need to leverage that. We need to see how we can make use of that attention to digital media in our teaching and learning. Just to recap, we've already been through the digital proficiency and productivity, which is the foundation. That's the computer literacy side. That's in terms of being able to use various tools to to communicate with people, as we'll see in this particular presentation as well. Choosing correct hardware, software, and so forth, troubleshooting, staying up to date. Then we moved on to information, data, and media literacies, the different types of approaches to collecting information in the digital spaces, interpreting it, and also things like using the research data, databases for research, and understanding, of course, of an intellectual property, the copyright law aspect. The last time we looked at the creation of digital artifacts, different ways of producing digital artifacts, like text, images, video, or combinations of them, blogs, wikis, PowerPoint. The wikis are going a bit out of fashion at the moment, I think, although we still have Wikipedia, screen recording software, all of these different types of ways of producing some sort of digital artifact, and also using problem-solving tools, digital tools. Today, we're going to come on to this particular one, digital communication and collaboration, and we're going to look at the different aspects of communication in terms of using different types of digital platforms. And then we move on to the digital identity and being, and the digital teaching and learning. I'm not going to go into those in too much detail, but that's what's coming up. So I just want to create, once again, before we move into the communication aspects, the full picture of where we've been. And this is, as I've mentioned, according to the JISC framework. Okay, so today we are going to focus on this particular aspect of communication, collaboration, and participation. And here we're going to see different aspects of what we've been through previously coming into play. Okay, I mean, it's not really that difficult. It's not that complex. I mean, for example, there are three different aspects of it. There's digital communication, digital collaboration, and digital participation. So digital communication is, simply put, any communication that uses some type of digital platform or media, network or something along those lines. Digital collaboration, this is the ability to take part in digital teams, working groups in the online space, but meeting specific goals and using things for a specific purpose, not just a sort of general social chat in an online chat room and things like that. This is why I emphasized it earlier, is there's a very specific purpose to the collaboration, the online collaboration, and working in teams and online spaces. And then we have digital participation, which is very similar to the collaboration, but it's more in an open-ended way. There's more sort of intrinsic motivation, if I can put it that way, to actually go into online spaces and participate in different types of groups, subject-related groups, and so forth. And do your own sort of exploration in terms of forming networks in those spaces. And as we go, please keep in mind, what does this mean in the context of your course? How would you contextualize a lot of what I'm going to present here? And how are your students performing in these areas at the moment? This is just really for self-reflection. How do you see your students, what sort of levels of capability do they have as we go through this? And how they, as it says, they encounter, practice, and particularly get feedback on these aspects. And also, one thing to also think about is to what extent you are actually participating in these ways, and where perhaps there are some areas where you feel that maybe you need a bit more support in that way, and so forth. Just in terms of remembering that you are the person who's actually going to be able to introduce the students to these aspects within your particular subject field. So also thinking along those lines as we go through what I'm presenting here. Okay, in terms of digital communication, what I'm going to do, as I have in the previous presentations, is move through a scenario of first year, then during degree, and then post-degree, just to get an idea of the sort of skills that are expected of students. Of course, the basic skills as they have been up to now in previous presentations, but more specifically in communication. They need to be able to use email, text messaging, file sharing, social media, even and things like, you know, producing online videos and so forth. We'll see how the different aspects actually come together. I mean, you can see already we've been dealing with things like data literacy and so forth. So we're going to be moving into that sort of more specific area. But like, for example, online videos, but the production, there's the media literacy aspect coming in. Again, there's the aspect of etiquette, how to actually behave in online environments. Simply because you can't be seen doesn't mean that, you know, you can get away with a lot of things. I think people are a bit more, let's put it this way, they're a bit more savvy around etiquette, but I think a lot of people just simply don't pay attention to those rules for various reasons, not necessarily in the academic environment, but that can happen. As the students move through their degree, there again is the appropriate communication with other students and staff and other members of the university in a particular, even if it's an email or a WhatsApp and things like that. The students need to be made very aware of what is appropriate and what's inappropriate in terms of that idea of netiquette. And then the ability to use a range of media and also focus on a range of audiences in terms of digital communication, academic or professional, and, you know, realize the dividing line between the academic and professional and your own social, you know, network and so forth. That sort of thing, you know, that you can't really come into a professional academic space and use, for example, the type of language you would use, although there's maybe a case to be made of, you know, they can, but there is a very different way of communicating in these spaces. And then also initiate communications across different media and settings, you know, for example, we've got WhatsApp, Teams, Zoom, any type of digital communication platform, even, you know, let's say, for example, Twitter. I think also in terms of being aware and things like, well, X, as it's now called, although Elon Musk is now thinking about going back to Twitter, but that's an aside. Those sort of platforms, being very aware of how they communicate, and if they're representing the university, things like Facebook, any of these platforms, anything that's outside of the university network, they have to be made very, you know, aware that communicating in certain ways or saying things that they might be representing VITs, for example. Okay, in terms of going to the end of degree, they need to use a range of digital communication media, you know, the usual things we've mentioned: email, online forums, video conferencing, media sharing sites, and they have to be very savvy and very comfortable about being in these spaces. And I think this is something that we need to address, in that I don't know that students and of course lecturers too are all that comfortable in these spaces, and it's difficult to actually communicate that sense of comfort and ease to students if you yourself don't feel that way. Look, it's not an uncommon thing at all. I mean, we're mostly, you know, moving in face-to-face environments, embodied environments, but we're becoming gradually more and more dependent on these digital platforms for communication. So it is very, very important to actually develop a sense of one's own ease in these virtual environments, and that can then be communicated to students. And I think it's important, and I wanted to really highlight this, is to not think of the virtual environments as another environment. It really speaks to, and this is one of my interests in terms of research as well, it speaks to how we do perceive ourselves in these virtual environments. It isn't really another environment, but we tend to have this barrier to things like Teams and Zoom. It's that sense of disembodiment. And yet I think for me personally, particularly in terms of teaching and learning and generally, it is that sense of who you are in the online environment. It's not a case of being like, well, I'm a different person. It's a different environment completely. It's more a sense of actually extending yourself into that environment, much the way you would, and present yourself much the way you would in an embodied sense. You are embodied you literally are embodied in front of the you know, the computer, or your you know, in front of your phone or whatever it might be, your iPad, but you are equally embodied in many ways in the online environment. And I think we must be very careful not to disassociate ourselves from that environment by thinking we're not embodied there. We're embodied, and more certain, definitely in cognitive terms, we are embodied in that environment. And I think that is a very important thing to keep in mind, is that it's not an alien environment. We may be, as it were, disconnected from the people in that environment, but we are very much still connected with them. and connected cognitively, particularly, how we are actually in that space. But that's a conversation for a different time. But I do believe it's a very important aspect, particularly in terms of digital communication and so forth, and just generally being in the digital space. There's also that when students have come to the end of the degree, and as they move through, I often feel that many of these things are applicable, as they move through, as well as being, a result. Well, it's actually something that's ongoing after the degree in any case. But being able to communicate inclusively with that awareness of the social, cultural, and personal differences between people, that speaks very much also to etiquette, the online etiquette as well. To realize that it's not just your particular type of person, whether it's religion, race, whatever it might be, worldview. One has to be very sensitive to the fact that not everybody in that space, as you are in an embodied sense too, is going to have the same views as you have, for example, or the same world perspective. And then communicating in synchronous, both in synchronous and asynchronous contexts, and understanding the impact of timing, and pace within a particular environment. But I think the more important point there is synchronous and asynchronous. Synchronous is what we're doing now. We're having a synchronous session. We're all in the same place, even though it's a virtual space. We're in the same place at the same time. Asynchronous is when you're actually working in an online space, but you're not necessarily in the same time zone as somebody else, or the same, how can I put it, meeting space. So the asynchronous work that you do is very much the work that students do, that you give them to do. Let's say, for example, you give them an online activity, but it can be done at a particular time and place that is suitable to the student. That's an asynchronous type of activity. So the students must get used to communicating both synchronously, face-to-face, so to speak, in an online environment. That's a bit of a mixture, but also asynchronously, they must get used to speaking to each other, maybe in a discussion forum, for example, or recording a message offline and uploading it. Well, I mean, they do that in WhatsApp. That's an asynchronous communication. That's a perfect example, actually, in terms of like recording a voice message. That's an asynchronous form of communication. Or you have obviously the synchronous option on WhatsApp as well of actually having a video call. So that's just to give you an idea, but also the impact of time, particularly in terms of where somebody is living in time zones. Then respecting the norms of communicating in different digital spaces. For example, as I've mentioned here, this idea of social, academic, professional, the differences between them, and also the different types of discourse you will actually use in those particular places. So you can see, whilst this is about digital communication, it's about so much more than the digital. The digital is something that we are now interweaving in our normal day-to-day, the way we practice in day-to-day embodied environments, but it's there, and it's definitely something that needs to be interwoven, and cognizance needs to be taken of these things. And then also initiate and facilitating communication for different purposes. And this is where we start talking to the personal, professional networks that students are able to access, actually much more so than they were before. We really had, we had more connectivity, in digital spaces. This is something that that I think is very important, that students are encouraged to form, networks, in terms of communicating with other professionals. I'm sure they do in any case. I think there is a lot of this going on, in terms of being able to network more easily with people in different professions. Okay, digital collaboration. It sounds very similar to what we've really been talking about, and it is to a certain degree. And the basic skills here obviously are being able to access collaborative spaces, as I've just spoken about towards the end of the last slide, is to be able to get into, to work in those collaborative spaces, where there's a discussion forum. It might be a whole online group in Ulwazi, for example, where they if you put students into a group, they have access to different types of tools in that areas, such as collaborative documents, discussion forums, and so forth, that they can actually take part in there. And then also understanding some of the benefits and challenges of collaborating online. And those are, how do I actually work in a specific, what's the difference between a social environment and a more professional academic environment? The whole idea of the etiquette and so forth. So I mean, sometimes, yes, the disembodiment can be a problem. It might be, particularly if we're working as we are in a blended situation now, there are times when it is better to meet face to face or to work face to face. And typically in particularly the health sciences, you have to be in a particular lab at a particular time, in a particular clinical, environment. So I am very sensitive to that. And it's that idea of what can be done in what needs to be done, and where there is a need for an embodied space, but at the same time, what can also be, what are the benefits perhaps of working in a digital space to save time, perhaps, or to save people from traveling back and forth. I am very sensitive, of course, to the different challenges we have in our environments where people cannot always connect from, for example, a rural clinic to the university and so forth. But there are different types of benefits and challenges, and it's good that the students can and also lecturers can identify these. And as they move through the degree, using a range of different tools, the shared files idea, shared writing and drawing tools, for example, whiteboards, things like Miro, for example, for online collaboration, different design spaces, the shared calendar idea, task lists, and so forth. So that's more like almost like we're sort of moving slightly into project management area as well there. The ability to go into different online meeting environments such as Teams and Zoom, which of course we had during COVID, and I think students have got very used to that now. And then also, again, the formality and informality of different environments, and using different types of media, in terms of collaboration, specific, and also looking very specifically at what is suitable for your specific subject area. Again, I keep coming back to this, and it's very important that these things are adapted to a specific subject area or topic or whatever it might be. And then also being able to develop content collaboratively. I think a lot of students are doing this already in terms of things like Office 365 and Google Docs and so forth. They are using things like this, but also being able to use the review features, particularly in Microsoft Word, track changes, all that sort of stuff. So those are sort of things to look at. And again, I personally feel these two things speak to each other. This is supposedly an outcome, but I think this is being developed right through the degree. The idea of working productively in digital teams and groups and projects and so forth, to meet either short-term or long-term goals. And then initiating and supporting collaborative activities. Now, this is where the networking comes in, and taking a range of different roles within these spaces, in terms of, different team members, different types of functionalities, different types of things that you need to do, such as the collation of the data that you might have, time management, facilitation, and so forth. So being able to move through these different types of roles and tasks and so forth. And again, very importantly, that ability to collaborate across cultural, national, and or subject specialist boundaries using different types of digital media. So that is a very, very important aspect. And then contributing to open projects, for example, this is again the networking aspect. Open content, software, wikis, so forth. I mean, the wikis are quite a good example. I remember, although it may not apply in health sciences, I do remember a while back somebody mentioning to me in the Wits Business School they had actually got the postgrad students there to contribute to a page on Wikipedia. I don't know what the exact subject was, but there, when you get students to go into that particular environment, you get them to, there's more of a sense of an onus on them to produce a good level of quality in that particular environment, because they know it's for public consumption, on Wikipedia. So if there is a specific topic, and I mean, there are some very good pages on Wikipedia that are very heavily referenced, in terms of people have done a lot of research, like a lot of work on them. It's not just a simple page that any old soul has come along and populated. So that is quite an interesting aspect, is to perhaps use things like that in terms of communication, and that is a form of communication and an online space, and in which the student will have to actually produce some sort of particularly quite high quality of work. So that's something to bear in mind, just as an idea for that. Okay, digital participation. Now, I feel sometimes they are splitting hairs. I do feel they are splitting hairs at times, looking at the divide between these different types of things. So digital participation is, being able to access online networks, discussion spaces, and social media. Now we're delving more deeply into that network idea of professional networking and academic networking and so forth. And again, understanding some of the benefits and risks, particularly the risks of participating online. Here we are now looking at things like, the way you express yourself, as I said earlier, how you express yourself in a particular online environment. So as they're moving through the degree, it's the active participation. We know we have a challenge with this in terms of students not, when we do have an online session, students don't contribute. And this is where we can make the students more at ease in the environment, try and engage them more actively in the environment. So by modeling that active engagement, we can actually, encourage them. I know it's easier said than done, because we've all had this experience of speaking to an audience that is not really, responding. But more specifically, I often hear it from lecturers that they have quite a few challenges in terms of students not responding. But this is where we are coming in with the whole idea of being digitally literate. And I feel that is part of the challenge. That is why students are not participating, in these environments, because they're not being habituated to these digital environments within, for example, an educational environment. We, as Mark Prensing, he had this whole idea of the students being really tech savvy. Yes, I do believe they are, but they're not tech savvy in the correct way in an academic environment. It takes, it's a holistic approach to this, as you will see as I will get, as I go further into the presentation. We have to think of things in a way that speaks to their academic literacy as well. It's not just like academic literacy is over here, and they've got to have the writing skills and all the different types of things that epistemological things and all of those sort of things, and then we have digital literacy on the other side. It doesn't work like that. It has to form a holistic whole. And this is why I feel that we need to do a lot more work in terms of ensuring that students are becoming more digitally literate, because it's more than just, as I've said, and I've said it over and over again in these presentations, it's more than simply being able to use, let's say, a laptop or a desktop or a tablet or whatever it might be. It is far more than that. There's the whole, in fact, there is a whole epistemological side to it as well, but I'm not going to go into that here. That's for another presentation on another day. Also things like setting up and managing personal profiles. This is very important. How you present yourself in the online environment, things like your awkward profile and so things like that, or ID. I don't know, some people say awkward, I've heard people say awkward ID as well. Things like that, academia, all these different platforms, LinkedIn, all of these things, how you're presenting yourself in communicating your professional profile in the online environment. And particularly on university systems, you can actually start with this on Ulwazi, because the students can develop a profile, admittedly not a very, broad profile, unless they, of course, they do a portfolio or something like that. But anyway, that idea. And then also, very importantly, making very specific, laying down the ground rules in terms of what is permissible within the university environment and within the subject and professional community. What sort of approach is actually the norm, and so forth, because there are different ways. But that again speaks to the idea of discourse and so forth as well, that I've mentioned previously. And of course, the end of the degree, that active participation, forming those personal networks, you'll see further down. Also the location and connection to those online networks. Now, this also brings in the idea of the information and knowledge literacy, if I can put it that way. Where do you find these particular networks? How do you actually tap into them? How do you find them online? What sort of exploration do you do? And then also sharing digital resources and content that they have actually developed, and facilitating online exchanges, initiating, and here we go, initiating those new connections and conversations, which is far more easy than it used to be, in terms of the degree to which we are connected. And also, the initiation of new topics, sites, channels, and this is where the digital innovation also comes in that we spoke about last time. Becoming part of different groups, discussion lists, and outside projects, and also looking at in terms of digital participation in relation to personal relationships and professional practice. So that's this whole. A lot of these speak to the digital networking that a lot of people are, we are now able to do in using digital platforms and online platforms. So it's quite an interesting area to look at. Now, I just want to remind that I'm going back to this. I'm not going to go through all of this, but where we've been is very much speaking to where we are now, the digital communication, collaboration, and participation. So we've looked at digital proficiency, productivity, information data and media literacies, and the the digital creation, problem solving, and innovation. And the thing here is we can't really get here without all of this. The basic, this encompassing the basic computer literacy, the ability to use the tools, and getting comfortable with the tools and orientating yourself in these environments, and then being able to actually retrieve information, collate it, analyze it, all those sort of things, produce different types of information, or in different forms, whether it be text, images, or combination of those, or video and text, or whatever it might be, and different still images, just generally not being being able to produce it in different forms. And then the whole idea of creating, innovatively, particularly different types of digital artifacts and so forth, and be able to use it for problem solving. These two actually speak very strongly to each other in terms of, problem solving, in terms, like, for example, coding things, although this is now done, in terms of AI, which we will be looking at, in more depth in a couple of weeks. But all of these things, there isn't they are not separate. They all speak to each other, and particularly these three speak very much to the digital communication, collaboration, and participation, as we will see in this particular slide. So in terms of the digital proficiency and productivity, to go back in a little more depth to what we looked at previously, here it's about using specialist digital devices and software as required, particularly in the health sciences, professional scholarly context, using advanced functions of the productivity software such as Office 365, and then looking at the assessing digital tools, and in terms of how you can use it in a specific context. It may not always be obvious, but that idea of adaptability, adapting a particular tool to a particular context, and then the ability to work in the same vein across a range of different devices, applications, and so forth. Then looking at the information and data and media literacies, using search engines and catalogs to find relevant information, the importance of following ethical, legal, and security guidelines in terms of, and particularly we're very, very sensitive to this in terms of research, the ability to produce a range of digital media using different types of tools, assessing value, credibility, particularly important, and particularly in terms of AI at the moment, the value and credibility and relevance of digital information in relation to a specific task or issue, and then understanding how data is used to construct arguments, cases, and so forth. Very, very important, particularly in the academic area. And then going more into the digital creation and problem solving side, I've just picked out there a lot more. I'm just picking out specific aspects. There are a lot more that are contained within the framework, but these are just to bring this into a whole. So in terms of the creation, using a range of digital media to produce different types of things for, particularly as we've been discussing, culinary or professional communication. There's the idea of being able to do presentations, produce posters and infographics, and different types of media, and then how to select, prioritize, and interpret data to answer original questions, solve problems. There's that problem-solving aspect of it, and then deriving conclusions or making professional decisions based on digital data and evidence, which I think most professions these days, that is how most of the stuff is produced digitally these days, or not necessarily all of it, but a lot of it is. So there's that idea of being able to actually, where what you've extracted, to be able to actually, how you represent it, how you produce it, and how you actually derive conclusions based on what you have actually, got there, and then trying out new digital applications and approaches. That's that idea of, as I spoke about earlier, even in terms of this, it speaks, as you can see, I have these arrows pointing in both directions because all of it speaks to all of it, combined. And then also exploring beyond the basic functionality of subject specialist software, things like that. Students that are going to have a look and see exactly what's possible with all of this. But all of it speaks to digital communication, collaboration, and participation. And this in turn speaks to academic literacy. that you cannot get away from the aspects of academic literacy that are involved here. There are certain types of approach that require certain types of equipment, certain types of software, certain types of devices, that may be suitable in one area and not in the other. So I don't want to go too deeply into this. A colleague and I, as I think I mentioned in the previous presentation, we are actually looking at this in terms of the combination of academic and digital literacy. You can't get away, I think, from the academic environment and the digital environment becoming more and more enmeshed in terms of all of these different types of things, which, I mean, especially in terms of information, data, and media literacies, all of this is very much, it speaks very much to academic literacy and vice versa. Yes, we need to foster that especially in certain subjects, not necessarily in the health sciences, but there are aspects of this, the idea of being able to write competently and within an academic environment and in an academic way, the different types of ways of writing, how you present an argument in a paper, for example, things like that, and this is something that is where we know we do have issues with this. But equally, we are facing how can I put this, a more difficult area of how we are addressing the digital and together with the academic literacy. And that's why this is one of the reasons why I'm presenting this series is we do need to think about, as much as we are concerned about academic literacy, we need to be concerned now not more, but to an equal extent as to how we integrate that with the digital literacy. Because as you've seen, there are a number of aspects to this. It's not simply being able to communicate in terms of producing an academic paper, for example, things like that. There's a lot more to it. There's this social aspect to it. There are all types of behavioral aspects to this. And this is why I have really, emphasized this interplay between all of these. We have to think of it literally, holistically. It cannot, we can't. I have presented these, and I'm presenting these in different little sections. But now, as you've seen today, I am now trying to show the integration between all of these different aspects that we've looked up, at up to now, and how all of these speak now to being able to communicate digitally, but also planting it very firmly within the sphere of academic literacy. So this is something that is really, really, really important to bear in mind in terms of these two different, supposedly two different types of literacies. I'm not sure that we can even divide these anymore. They are really, they are both. The academic is just as essential, particularly if what you want the students to produce when they go out into the working environment. I mean, we have had various reports of students not being as digitally literate within their specific subject fields as they should be, and they're not able to use the tools when they go out into a working environment, efficiently, in a way that you would expect from somebody who's just completed a degree. I mean, this is not a new thing. I know it occurred even when I graduated. I didn't have the digital wherewithal, and not just computer literacy. Yes, certainly I could use a keyboard. And I mean, this is I don't want to reveal my age. This is quite some time back. But I was not able to apply it in my working environment immediately. And I didn't, one hadn't even been taught that there's a specific way of approaching something in terms of being able to produce as it was then. I mean, compared to now, it's not as involved. But I didn't know when I left university. I had no idea. And they were expecting, the employers I approached were expecting me to be what we would now talk about as digitally literate, in a specific environment. And I wasn't. I'd come out with all this wonderful theoretical knowledge, but as far as transferring that into a working environment and understanding, and this is also very important, understanding how things interlink in terms of using a particular computer system, how being able to understand the logical flow of the information, or where to get the information. I mean, I did this intuitively in many ways. It sounds like I went into a working environment and just was completely useless. I don't mean it like that. But we need to understand that the students need to be what I like to call digitally fluent in their particular profession. Particularly these days where it's just becoming, in those days, it was already kind of it was sort of a nice to have, but it was already becoming more and more imperative that you had that knowledge, that you had that ability to use a word, something as simple back then as a word processor efficiently. But now it's become more, there's more of an onus on us to actually produce students who are comfortable, as I say, can move fluently within the working environments in terms of the digital tools that they require in those environments. And on that subject, I'd like to know how do you, or how would you, some of you I know are already integrating these skills. How would you integrate these skills into the curriculum? I'm very interested to hear people's opinions on what I've just been talking about, and how you feel it could be, included in the curriculum in a more, how can I put it, integrated way in terms of what the students need to do. So if you'd like to use your mic, or perhaps put something into the chat.
Oh, Fiona, that's a bit scary. I think people are just thinking upfront straight away.
I know it's a lot of information. I'm a bit concerned, actually, Shira, when I'm presenting this. I'm aware that I'm bombarding people with all sorts of different concepts and ideas and things like that. So I'm not expecting some great, but I mean, even if you express how you're feeling about this, because if you are feeling overwhelmed, I'm not going to be surprised. Stuart, if you'd like to come in.
Hi, Fiona. Thank you very much. That was really great. I wanted to ask you something. I was in a session yesterday that I was hosting, an online session. I think Anae's in this meeting. She was there as well. So I was hosting an online session, and the session was on communication skills.
Yes.
And I was sort of very conscious of, I've done online courses before where we were asked to have our cameras on the whole time. And it gave a very different feel to that online experience with regards to engagement with the students. And often in our context, we talk about, bandwidth and data costs and things like that. And I noticed when I said, how would people feel about turning their cameras on? You can see we've got a bit of a culture of people really not expecting to turn their cameras on.
Yes.
And a lot of people treating online sessions as you sort of put it on and you can multitask. And I don't know if you have advice on how to use... Because it's nice that we've gotten used to maybe using things like Zoom and Teams and stuff like that, but I don't know if we're using them well, and we sort of have a culture of difficulty engaging in these sessions. I mean, you just said now, like, does anyone want to say anything? And there's always that pause where it's like, who's going to be?
Always.
And so it doesn't feel, if we were in person, I think people would engage much more. And how can we use these tools? Because I was very conscious. I was literally hosting a session on communication.
Yes.
And then trying to figure out how to engage the group more, because we sort of have a culture of listening into webinars and not engaging. So I don't know if you have some advice there.
Yes, it's actually very tricky. I mean, we've all experienced this. I even experienced it in what are more personal online spaces. We have groups that are, other groups outside of work that are online. We have exactly the same problem. People simply don't want to turn on their cameras. Look, there could also be, on a more practical note, there could be problems with bandwidth and things. If you have too many people on a video and you don't have a very strong network connection, then things can go a bit wonky too. So there is that practical aspect. But, as I mentioned earlier, my feeling really is that we are not keeping up in terms of the more psychological, the social aspects of this, the more how people are perceiving themselves in the online environment. I continue to feel, and this is nothing new on my part. It's not just since Teams and Zoom have come into more currency, if I can put that. They've been used more often. These online environments. We really have to orientate people to the online platforms, online environment, communicating digitally, so to speak. I don't, digitally sounds a bit dated, but communicating in these what we call virtual spaces, and having a sense of presence in the space. And I think that's why it's very important, if you are doing these sort of things, if you are going to use these tools, is to just have a few more casual interactions with the students, even if it's for half an hour. Get them used to using the online space, get them used to putting their cameras on, and I know people are very wary of that. They don't like being on camera. I mean, even myself, I have to admit, I often have my moments, not always. I'm far more used to it now because I do it, as I say, outside of work environments as well. I mean, there is a certain hesitancy because, I mean, some of us we look a bit strange on camera, but I think it's to emphasize those points to the students, that it's important that you see that you are dealing with somebody else in that environment, that they do have a presence in that environment. And I think this is something that we've got a long way to go with this. It's not something that's going to be done overnight, but I've felt this way for many, many years when I first encountered these sort of problems quite a long time ago. I'm talking about the early 2000s now. is that the lack of sense of comfort in these virtual environments, and it speaks to something. That is why we have to start integrating it slowly into our different teaching fields. But I know this is not. I know you're wanting me to give you a quick answer, Stuart. I can't. It's because this is sort of thing is going to take some time to get into, the students orientated to these environments, and I think the more we ourselves become more orientated to the environment, we're more comfortable in the environment, it's easier to get the students involved. I'm interested, Stuart, how do you feel? And I'm genuinely interested, when you go into these environments, do you feel a certain sense of disconnection?
I think I do. I think often the conversation becomes quite stilted. And then you feel like you're having a conversation with an audience rather than everyone taking part in a conversation. I found the courses I did where it was at a different institution where the culture was just absolutely, if you join an online meeting, your camera's on. So it was sort of normalized.
Yes.
And I found those much more engaging because you could see everyone's faces.
Yes.
Everyone was very aware that if they start looking at their phone and stuff, everyone can see that they've become distracted. So everyone was a bit more engaged. And once you could see everyone, they weren't sort of just scary icons on the screen.
Yes.
And then people generally, after a bit of time, kind of got used to seeing everyone and kind of relaxed a bit and chatted a bit more, because I find it becomes almost like the session where instead of people chatting to each other, it always becomes almost like a Q&A where the host answers a question, responds to the question, and the next person asks and responds. And if you're looking for more of a discussion, I have found that quite difficult to do, particularly if people don't have their cameras on.
Yes, no, it's very true.
I know there's no quick answer solution here.
Without the cameras on. I mean, I'm talking about, well, we must have our cameras on and all that sort of thing. I'm sitting here without my camera on as well. Not really intentionally, but I am sitting without it on. So it does make a difference. In fact, I'm going to put it on. Having said that, I'm going to put my camera on. Because you can see, if you have somebody who's like gesturing the way I am, and is more animated, you can see the animation in somebody's, when they're talking, then it makes quite a difference to it, because then you can tell how much passion, or you can, as many lecturers have said, you can see whether there's confusion on a student's face. That's why, and I think you can emphasize that as well, is that, to the students, look, I don't know if you're having a challenge if I can't see you. What you could do, maybe as a sort of icebreaker at the beginning of a session, is like ask everybody to switch their cameras on, and then maybe ask them to do something physical, like drawing, and then hold it up to the camera and things like that, just so it entices people into being physically present, like in terms of being on camera. That can help a lot, just to get them to do something that they need to put something up to the camera, just to begin with. And then as you go, it's not going to be a fast process. As you go, the students will then see the benefits of being present to the camera. There will always be those students who are very shy. I mean, I can imagine myself as an undergraduate being horrified to be, as I am now, in the online environment, to be present as I am now. So there are challenges, but it is, as you said, that idea of normalizing. The more we do it, the more used to it the students will become. But having said that, it's not a case of, being prescriptive and saying you must, like a deterministic thing of you must do this. Only use it when it's necessary as well. I always say this about any digital tool in teaching and learning, only if it's necessary, if it suits the subject, if it suits what you're doing. That's something, a proviso I want to actually make. So I'm going to put my camera off now again, but just so that was just, yes, Shira, you want to come in?
Yes, thanks, Fiona. I mean, I agree completely with what you're both debating here, is that it's very hard to get that in-person feel, that connected feel, unless you can see people. And we have developed a culture where, I mean, you were talking about it, you put your cameras on, and we can invite others to put their cameras on, but I can tell you not everyone will, which I think is interesting. I just wanted to take you one step back here. You asked us, how can we integrate these skills into our curriculum? And I do know that, for example, using a good blended learning site, and by that I mean following all the instructions to build, etc. We have a lot of how-to documents. So we understand that students may not know how to use an app or how to open their e-portfolio or how to use the situation properly. And we post a document, and then we assume that the learning's happened. And I'm wondering to what extent there's even value in doing that, or if we physically have to find time in the curriculum to go through how to do something and then post the resource, or to do it. I mean, at the moment, we're just using it so that they can use the resource so that they can then hand in work or do whatever work we want them to do. But is there a place for thinking that at a university level, you might need to test the proficiency of students in this arena?
I do agree. No, you definitely do. As I say, it's that whole idea of that just because they're able to use a computer, they'll be able to do something, or use a mobile phone. You have to give them some sort of example, preferably if it's blended, obviously, in a face-to-face situation. If you can make it, a few minutes, a bit of time to actually demonstrate it to them. But also, one of the things you can do is to create a few low-stakes, let's say, assignments, for example, just to get them to, for example, upload an assignment. Even if it's a paragraph on something, it must be connected, though, to some sort of learning outcome or something that you're doing, but something that's not going to count for a hectic amount of marks, but might be almost like a participation mark, if I can, maybe use that sort of term, just to get the students to become comfortable with a tool, a particular tool, get them to submit something that isn't something that's going to be dire, like a summative assessment or a more formal, formative assessment that might be for a higher number of marks, but it could contribute towards participation, for example, just to get the students more into the environment and getting comfortable with using that particular tool. But yes, I do agree with you, Shira. There does need to be a certain amount of, I would say, face-to-face demonstration, just to make the student more comfortable and to have a first demo. But there's also the aspect of what it made me think of one particular lecture. I think it was in one of the science schools. I think one of the schools in sciences. They actually, and I'm sure you do it there in health sciences, to give the student and video of how to use things. It can go the other way around. You can use the online environment to actually demonstrate how to use tools in the lab and things like that. But I'm digressing slightly. But it's a similar sort of thing, is that you're getting the student used to. In fact, it's the reverse. For example, you produce a student about how, a thing about what students must do with certain types of equipment in the lab. They then are habituated to that in a video, and then come into the physical space. It works the same way. There are different ways of doing it. I hope that answers the question to a certain degree.
Yes, no, absolutely. And I would like to hear from everybody the kinds of things that you do to make sure that your students are able to communicate digitally within your courses or with each other. I'd be surprised if there are still not WhatsApp groups amongst students, amongst themselves, and amongst students and lecturers, even though we went through that whole POPIA thing and knowing what they're doing with the data and all the rest of it. I still think that people do use that unthinkingly as a communication tool for academic purposes. And I'm interested to know people's experiences of that.
Yeah, they do certainly in our faculty. Stuart?
Just interesting. It's some things that we just take for granted. So like as simple as email. I was supervising a group of students doing research, and then we reached the point where like, okay, now you can email people and ask them to send the survey out. And then I was CC'd on the email and then was horrified. It was like, take that back. And then had to sit with them and just have a discussion about email etiquette, how to structure an email, how to, addressing people by name and just simple things. And I just realized that, it's often things we take for granted. And like you're saying, just WhatsApp groups and things like that was such an important learning opportunity. And it hadn't even crossed my mind to talk about, something as simple as just, how to construct, an email and proper email etiquette. So it's just always interesting.
Yes, I agree. Haroon, would you like to come in?
Yeah, so I think that the idea with this is you have to experiment, and I can give lots of examples both in the undergraduate and in the postgraduate field about trying it. So let me share quickly 4 or 5 quick ones. So
Please do.
the use of portfolios and e-portfolios, I've encouraged that particularly in the postgraduate space. And so what that means is initially it was a written portfolio, it then translated into a Word document, but very quickly students went onto the internet platforms and started designing their portfolios. These were a series of, after each module you had to present them, but they would present this in that space, and they quickly learned how to set up their spaces on the internet, learning how to do that as an example. And even students who came in with very low digital literacy skill quickly mastered it. I was surprised.
Yes.
Another example is in the 6-year space. We decided that skills training, when we assessed it, things like child development or how to immunize, it was done very poorly in the assessment setting. So we said, okay, fine. What you do is when you are at the clinics, you have to now develop a video on how to immunizing a real child or doing a length on a real child. Again, that brought a whole lot of challenges to students because firstly, they had to get some idea of how do they actually video in a setting. Obviously, they use their own devices, but they had to learn skills around how to make a short 3-minute clip. Some of them obviously wanted to go and they added music and a whole lot of things, and I dissuaded them because it just meant large files. They then needed to know how to put that onto the Ulwazi platform. So that was a whole learning. And again, most students very easily managed this. A few initially had hiccups, but by the time we were doing the 3rd cohort, everybody was into this. So that's an example. Let me give you one other story where, in fact, I'm very keen on open book assessment. So for the evidence-based medicine, there was a test, the first earlier test. They do a 50 MCQ test, and I said you can bring any device, bring your cell phones. You can refer during the test to anything that you want. The way this test is designed, is I'll be 30 seconds more, is that you get, as you answer each question, you get the correct response. So you do an MCQ, you put your answer, and you get feedback. So I was very keen on this idea, but I quickly changed my mind because in the first test, I allowed this. And what happened was students used their cell phones, but immediately they I actually gave them answers, and they weren't, the answers weren't, what's the word I'm looking for, where they rotated. So it was always, one was always B and 2 was C. Yes. And I've quickly found a student who they had formed a WhatsApp group for that test, and they were WhatsApping each other that one is A and B. 20 students were in that network. So again, it promptly, I was stuck. I stopped that you can bring any other material, but you can't bring a cell phone. And it's not the way I learn. I mean, there's ways of overcoming these, but I think the story gives you the sense is you want to sometimes practice bringing in technology, but students will find a way of sometimes subverting that activity. Let me stop there.
Unfortunately, yes, no, that has happened on a number of occasions in different faculties where students have then, especially during COVID, during the ERTL sort of period, that was one of the challenges we faced, was that we trusted the students, but then very innovatively and regarding communication, they went and did these sort of things. But yeah, there are ways around it, but it's interesting, these challenges that we have. Did you still want to come in?
Another comment? Yeah. Okay. Cool. Fiona, if people have time, I'd be very happy for them to ask more. If you have a couple of minutes to hang around.
Yes.
And so I don't want people to feel like the time is an issue. Okay. Yes. I guess we do run to a very strict calendar, Stuart. Thanks for coming along. If not, then I am going to say to everybody that this discussion is ongoing. As Fiona said, there's still parts of the framework that we're going to discuss, with the capstone maybe of July being a discussion on how we need to think about AI in learning. And I think that will be very valuable for all of us, even if we don't have a lot of writing intensive courses. I think there's a lot that we can gain from all of this. So Fiona, I'm going to thank you for this week very, very much. I know it's very daunting to talk to a screen, but be assured there are a lot of people listening, taking notes, being very interested in what you're talking about. And we look forward very much to next week. Thanks so much. Enjoy the rest of the day, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.